Hey folks, this is Kevin again, and this is the third installment of my The Truth About Inflation video series. Today we're going to expose some more lies, of course, by the federal government and the Federal Reserve. And we're going to talk about their supposed hardline stance on inflation and their panicked attempt at damage control to try to convince you that we are not in a recession right now.
Inflation.
So, over the last few days, we've gotten some more bad economic news. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates again, another 0.75%, bringing the Fed funds rate to 2.25%. More on that later. At the same time, we've gotten the economic data on quarter two, and the economy shrank again. Not much, but a decline nonetheless. And now I know you're all shocked because we've been told for months now how great the economy is and how much money we all have, that we don't even know what to do with it all, right?
We've laid an economic foundation that's historically strong.
So the U.S. economy is actually in pretty strong shape.
Well, I see the U.S. economy being on a strong growth spurt at the moment.
When we look at where we are economically, and we are stronger economically than we have been in history. When you look,
Very, very strong. Incomes are high. People have money on their in the bank accounts.
To start, we're going to have a hugely strong economy, and it's probably going to go well into 2022 and maybe 2023 because of $7 trillion of spending.
So why then have we been hearing the R word getting thrown around lately? If you haven't heard already, there's a lot of talk this week about the White House and government officials changing the definition of what a recession is. Well, it's like I said in my previous videos, and if you haven't seen them, I encourage you to check them out. There is a link in the description of this video. So a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth. And we've known since April that quarter one was negative. It was negative 1.6%, if I remember correctly. And this quarter was down negative 0.9%. So this is the textbook definition of a recession. Well, not so fast, we've been told. That's not the definition of recession. Negative GDP is just one of many factors that determine if we're in a recession. In fact, we were told that there's only one institution in the whole country that even has the power to determine if we're in a recession, and that's the National Bureau of Economic Research. And you're not them, so until they say we're in a recession, you just keep ignoring what your eyes and ears and wallets are telling you. So what's really going on? It's really just the same thing they've been doing for the last 18 months now. Telling us it's not nearly as bad as your wallet and your eyes are telling you. Don't believe your own eyes. We'll be the ones to tell you what to believe.
So I do not think the U.S. is currently in a recession.
Over 500,000 jobs a month since President Biden was elected, and I think that's going to continue into next year.
It doesn't seem that the U.S. economy is in recession right now.
We've got a good, strong labor market. This is not an economy that's in recession.
when you look at the jobs numbers, more than 8.7 million of new jobs created.
That doesn't sound like a recession to me. Thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Telling us it's just transitory and this is just a period of short-term pain.
Well, David, Fed Chair Jay Powell reiterating that inflation has increased notably in recent months, but does remain transitory.
No, I'm in the camp that it's transitory.
That these inflation rises will be transitory, that they will come back down next year.
Will settle down.
Transitory.
Transitory.
That inflation will come down next year.
This is going to be ease inflationary pressure, not increase it, ease inflationary pressure.
It will ease longer-term inflationary pressures.
This bill is going to ease inflationary pressure.
I think we're starting to see signs that the Fed's thesis that the recent bout of inflation will in fact prove transitory, or at least we're seeing early signs of that.
In the end, it will be transitory, and people need to have faith in the central bank that we will do that.
But more importantly than that, telling us to suck it up, because this is the price of freedom in Ukraine.
Do you worry about criticism that we're spending billions and millions of dollars to support Ukraine and not spending it here?
It's my job to worry, so I worry about literally everything. But fundamentally, no.
For all those Republicans in Congress criticizing me today for high gas prices in America, are you now saying we were wrong to support Ukraine? Are you saying we were wrong to stand up to Putin? Are you saying that we would rather have lower gas prices in America and Putin's iron fist in Europe?
And while most Americans are having a hard time making ends meet, going deeper into debt, making sacrifices in our budgets, which, if our economy is as strong as they say it is, and the consumer has as much savings as they claim, why are so many of us being forced to choose between steak and bologna? But I digress. So while all this is going on, what does the leadership in Congress think are the most important issues in America right now? Well, for Nancy Pelosi, it's making boatloads of money on insider trading. But she doesn't want to talk about that.
Nancy Pelosi denying accusations of insider trading after financial disclosures showed that her husband bought as much as $5 million in computer chip stock, NVIDIA, ahead of this week's vote on a bill that would deliver billions of dollars in subsidies to the chip manufacturing industry.
In the course of your career, has your husband ever made a stock purchase or sale based on information you received from you?
No, absolutely not. Okay.
And end of conversation.
And for Mitch McConnell, it's making sure we expand NATO?
Well, here we are, 2 weeks out from the August recess. In terms of the priorities for the country, I think clearly the most important thing to do before we leave is admitting Sweden and Finland to NATO. That's time sensitive. It must actually happen.
So hopefully that calms any fears of recession or runaway inflation you might have had, because it's clearly not the biggest thing on Congress's mind right now. And you can take that to the bank, like you're Nancy Pelosi, betting on semiconductor stocks while writing the legislation that sends billions of your dollars to those very same chip manufacturers. And that's another part of the big economic news this week. The CHIPS Act was passed. In this time of record high inflation, combined with recession, whether the White House wants to admit it yet or not, the spending continues. The CHIPS Act approves $280 billion in new spending to boost our semiconductor chip manufacturing in the U.S. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this is a great investment for America. If we're talking about building new facilities or training new workers, then we're not talking about solving the chip shortage this year, probably not even next year. Especially if some of these facilities will be in California, where you might have a year or more of just environmental impact studies. So maybe, just maybe, all this spending is not the right moment for right now. But I could be wrong. But what I'm not wrong about is that this will add about $8 billion per year to our deficit over the next 10 years, according to the CBO. Speaking of new legislation, Joe Biden got another victory this week when the Democrats and Republicans in the Senate came together on an agreement on what is called the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, the Senate still has to vote on this, but it seems like it has the support it needs to pass. The, quote, Inflation Reduction Act, counterintuitively, calls for spending almost $500 billion in order to fight inflation. Now, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they claim this bill will be paid for completely by raising $739 billion in new tax revenue. Over $300 billion of these taxes come from a minimum corporate tax of 15% on supposedly the 200 biggest companies in the U.S., nearly $300 more billion through prescription drug price reforms and measures that allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Another $124 billion will come from IRS enforcement of a reformed tax code. Yeah, I'm sure that's only going to affect the ultra-rich, right? And $14 billion by closing something called the carried interest loophole. Not sure what that is. Okay, so we've got a lot of taxes raised. Well, what are we going to spend this money on? Well, $369 billion is going to go to energy and climate-related programs. Great. I mean, look, I'm all for renewable energy and getting us off of fossil fuels at some point, but we are not there yet. And if anything has been made clear in the last 6 to 12 months, is that this administration is willing to let people go broke paying these outrageously high energy prices so they can force this green agenda on us. Now, by all means, let me know if you disagree with that, but I think their ultimate goal here is to force us onto this green energy plan.
Of getting half of our new vehicles to be electric within the decade is going to be urgently needed for us to meet the imperative of climate in our time. You got the executive order that sets that overall direction, the policy of the federal government. There is a business as well as a moral imperative to do something.
On the issue of gas prices, after waiting for a long time to have enough chips in this country to finally get my electric vehicle, I got it and drove it from Michigan to here this last weekend and went by every single gas station, and didn't matter how high it was.
I think it's fair to say that even you have implied that they should buy an electric vehicle and absolve themselves of that 80% increase per gallon.
For families thinking about getting an EV, families that once they own that electric vehicle will never have to worry about gas prices again.
And anyway, another $64 billion will go to extending the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, for another 3 years. If you've been paying attention, that's about $300 billion difference in the amount of taxes raised and the amount of money spent. So what are they going to do with the $300 billion? Well, they're going to put it towards reducing the deficit. Now that sounds great, right? I think we can all get on board behind that. How they're lying to us and manipulating us with these kinds of phrases is this is not eliminating the deficit. It's not eliminating any debt. All they're saying is we will print less money per year. So they will still be printing money out of thin air, spending money every year that we don't have, which is an inflationary practice, right? That is part of what got us here in the first place. They're just saying, well, we'll do less of it, okay? Now, keep in mind, all these numbers, these are spread over a 10-year period. A lot of these bills, when we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, we're talking over an extended period of time. And this bill happens to be over a 10-year period. Now, we take that $300 billion that's going towards the deficit, and that means that each year, $30 billion will be applied towards the deficit. Again, the government is not saying that we're going to stop printing money. All they're saying is we're going to print a little less. And by a little, now $30 billion a year is not nothing. Okay, I'm not scoffing at that number. That's an insane amount of money. But when you compare it to the $1.5 trillion deficits that we are expected and projected by their own numbers to run every single year for the next decade, which, I mean, really means forever, right? Their projections end at the end of the decade. So when you take $30 billion out of $1.5 trillion, folks, that's 2%. They're reducing the yearly deficit by 2%. I mean, what they're saying is that instead of printing $1.5 trillion, we're going to print $1.47 trillion. You see how much better this is for the economy? I mean, seriously, folks, you can't make this stuff up. Again, $30 billion is not an insignificant number. We can do a lot with that money. But you see, that's still fake money. It's money that we're just not printing. It's not like money that we have in the bank. So it's misleading at best for them to say that this is fighting inflation. So when you hear this talked about, and I'm sure this will pass because it looks like it's got the votes to pass, but when you hear this discussed as fighting inflation and Joe Biden and the administration are really doing something to fight inflation, please know that it's a lie. Now, it clearly will have an impact on any households who are struggling to pay for medications. If prescription drug prices really are going to come down, then there are a lot of people who will benefit from that, and that's wonderful. And someday, when our energy grid is truly able to accommodate some kind of green, sustainable, renewable energy, it will be better for America and the world, I'm sure. I don't disagree with that. But these things are not going to start affecting us as far as inflation for years. In fact, part of this money is going to be in the form of massive subsidies for solar companies, for electric car companies, for battery manufacturers, etc. Some of it's also going to go to consumers. If you buy an electric car, you'll get a rebate. So again, I'm not saying that these are bad things, but this is not fighting inflation. If the government is spending money, this is not fighting inflation. This is only fueling it. As far as the increased tax revenue, I mean, really, I'll believe it when I see it. Do you really think that the 200 biggest companies in the U.S., who I'm sure are all major donors to both political parties, you think they don't have accountants that can still find them some loopholes? I mean, again, I know it's cynical, but I'll believe it when I see it. And really, this legislation is basically just a very scaled down version of Biden's $4 trillion Build Back Better plan. And it's no secret either. I mean, here's CNBC pointing that out. And here's Biden himself laughing about it. Literally.
It's called the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Some of you will see a lot of similarities between the beginning of the Build Back Better initiative. It's not all of it, but.
So they want to convince you that this new slimmed down version of the Build Back Better plan is actually going to solve inflation, or if not solve, help inflation by bringing green energy, renewable energy, etc., that will save you from paying these high gas prices, these high energy prices to heat and cool your home. Maybe someday, but this isn't going to help you for at least 2022 and 2023. It's going to do nothing. Now, if you were already in the market for an electric car, solar panels for your home, then yeah, you might get a subsidy and that's going to be nice. But for the 64% of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck, they're not going to buy an electric car just to save money on gas, no matter how much of a subsidy the government gives you. And in this case, for the record, the max seems to be $7,500. So tell that to the people who live paycheck to paycheck. Hey, at least you'll save $7,500 on an electric car. You think they're going to give a crap? Probably not. I want to just read a couple things, some notes that I took from a speech that Jerome Powell gave when they raised interest rates the other day. He called the current Fed funds rate at 2.25%. He called that a neutral rate. Is neutral what we want while we have almost double-digit inflation? If they are serious about fighting inflation, and maybe they're not. I mean, clearly the government's not going to stop spending money. And the Fed will just keep printing the money that the government needs. So maybe they're really just not concerned at all about inflation skyrocketing. You know, we could be seeing hyperinflation at some point in the next couple of years. Who knows? I'm not hoping for it, and I'm certainly not trying to predict it. But they're not doing anything real and meaningful to fight inflation. He repeatedly said, we are not in a recession now. However, I have several clips where he was getting pressed on this issue and started to change his answer over time and saying things like, what I'm saying is we're not in a recession now, right?
I do not think the U.S. is currently in a recession.
So again, this is all just, they're trying to buy time before the midterms. They're trying to prolong your psychology of panic and changing your spending habits. You know, if you think there's going to be higher inflation down the road, you might change your spending habits to buy more stuff now before your money loses value. I've done it. I'm sure a lot of us have done it. You know, and they feel the same way about recession. If you believe that a recession is coming, you might start saving your money instead of spending it. But already we've got people saying, this recession is going to be light, it's going to be small, it's going to last, you know, it's not going to last long. That's not what we want. When we have almost 10% inflation, we need the economy to slow down. We really need to hit the brakes on spending, and we need to start switching to a saving mentality. And I'm not talking about just the consumers. I'm talking about the government as well. In fact, mostly the government. We cannot be spending trillions of dollars and printing it out of thin air. And so here's another thing. Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen and the White House, everybody really, the thing they keep coming back to as far as why we're not in a recession, they keep talking about the job market. We have record low unemployment. So this tight labor market is what they keep saying is really what you don't see this in a recession. You see unemployment, you see job losses.
Of course, I would point to the labor market in particular.
The labor market is now extremely strong.
They will eventually admit that we're in a recession. While we're arguing about this, the economy ain't getting any better. So they can deny it, whatever.
As I mentioned, it's true that growth is slowing.
And part of the proof of how strong the economy is how many jobs they've created in the last year and a half. Well, let's take a look at how many jobs they've created in the last year and a half. This is employment data from the Federal Reserve's website. Pre-COVID employment levels, at the height of COVID employment levels, and here's post-COVID employment levels. All that happened is everyone who stopped working went back to work. This isn't job growth, it's just people going back into the workforce. And another thing he mentions repeatedly is that we are going to see, quote, some softening in labor conditions. What does that mean, folks? That means jobs lost. That means unemployment. Here's another thing that they're not talking about. When we talk about inflation, we're talking about the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, what we as consumers pay for goods and services. There's also another measure called the PPI, the Producer Price Index. So this is the cost that producers pay for their goods and their services. Our Consumer Price Index rose by 9.1% year over year. The Producer Price Index rose at an even faster rate at 11.3%. If their prices are going up faster than our prices, you better believe at some point those are going to find some kind of equilibrium, which means our prices are going to go up. So Janet Yellen mentioned how, historic our economic recovery after COVID has been. It's unmatched in speed and scale, blah, blah, blah. However, we've got these headwinds like war in Europe and new strains of COVID. Sure, we know. All the things that we're going to blame inflation on and blame the economy slowing down on. She used to be the head of the Federal Reserve. How can this woman be wrong on everything, the biggest of things, and yet continue to hold the highest offices as far as finance and economics goes? And the same with Jerome Powell. I mean, he just got appointed as the head of the Federal Reserve. You think he did a good enough job in his first term that it warranted a renomination? I don't believe that they're incompetent. I believe that this is all intentional. That's my thought. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Just curious to know. But I don't think these people are just ignorant or incompetent, or that there are just things outside of, the realm of predictability. I mean, plenty of people were predicting all of these things. They're just lying. They're just liars, and they're bad liars. And that's why I think that a lot of this is deliberate. So this is a great one. I love this. This is just another way of manipulation, of lying with statistics. She touted how we've created over 9 million jobs, right? And I showed you before how, we're just back at the level of employment we were before you shut the economy down. And this is the greatest. We reduced the deficit by $1.5 trillion. Isn't that wonderful? Well, in my last video, I showed you the deficits during COVID were over $3 trillion. And now our deficit is $1.5 trillion. So yeah, you reduce the deficit by $1.5 trillion because we're not doing COVID spending anymore. That's all. And again, reducing the deficit is not an achievement. That's just printing less money. That's just creating less money out of thin air. It's not an accomplishment. They didn't do anything. She said most economists and most Americans, mind you, she's speaking for you now, have a similar definition of recession. Quote, substantial job losses and mass layoffs, businesses shutting down, private sector activity slowing considerably, family budgets under immense strain. In sum, a broad-based weakening of our economy. That is not what we're seeing right now when you look at the economy. Really? Okay. Maybe not the mass layoffs, but maybe that's just not where we're at yet, okay? Businesses shutting down, we've seen that. Private sector activity slowing, we've seen that. Family budgets under immense strain. How's your family's budget? Broad-based weakening of the economy? I mean, what does 10% inflation do you think? Even people like Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen, I mean, who are really just bankers, they're politicians, right? Joe Biden and the Democratic Party is their boss. And so they are lying on behalf of the party, on behalf of the establishment, just like any representative or senator would do the same, right? There's no difference. Inflation is the tax that we pay for the government to borrow enormous sums of money. That's what it is. High energy prices kept it cruising. There's no doubt about that. But you printed $6 trillion out of thin air and spent it. That's not a resilient economy. Look, I've been talking for way too long, and I'm going to wrap it up by just saying, really ask yourself, are they looking out for our best interests? Are they really trying to strengthen our economy? Or does it look like they're sabotaging it? The bottom line is, in my kind of final analysis, they're going to keep raising interest rates. The next Fed meeting is in September. Probably going to get a 50 or 75 basis point hike again. That'll bring us up to about 3%. They can't go much further than that. We have too much debt in this country. They might get up to 4%, but then they're going to have to reverse, and they're going to go straight back down. Okay? So raising interest rates is not going to solve inflation. They're telling us there's no recession, although every single economist and almost every metric you could look at says we are, except for unemployment. right? We'll see if that still holds, okay? Hopefully it does, obviously. But at the same time, I mean, something's got to give. Either the economy's got to suffer in order to bring inflation down, or we're just going to live with high inflation, folks. I mean, which one is worse, really? They've been kicking this can down the road since 2008 and probably before. We need a real recession to really reset asset prices and just consumer goods prices. We need the supply and demand chains to come back into some kind of equilibrium. And none of this is going to happen while all this cheap money is being pumped into the economy. But it's just because they don't care about us, folks. I mean, they lie to our faces. I believe a lot of this is deliberate, but even if it's not, they think that little of you that they don't even want it. They can't even tell you the truth. So I'm gonna wrap it up. I know that was super long. I'm sorry. Hey, if you are still here at the end, please let me know if you think these videos are informative. Please let me know if they really should be shorter. Like, it's just that there's so much material, there's so much stuff going on that I just feel compelled to put as much into each video as I can. Do you think that the length is okay? Could they be even longer? But I'm just really curious. If you're still here, let me know what you think about the length, and please give me any feedback you have. Anyway, good luck to everybody, and take care of yourselves and take care of your families. Take care.